Philippe is first master certificate coach in Europe, intercultural coaching pioneer, Professor Kenichi Ohmae, GSB, Japan. Do you hear us, Philippe?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear and see you very good.
You see me?
Yep.
Yes, all right. Well, I'm pleased to be with you, and I look forward to this session with you. So I think now is the time for me to share my screen.
I just want to ask you one question, Philippe. Is it
Of
more
course,
comfortable to read the questions to you after your presentation?
What I propose is, because I would have a hard time looking at the chat box and the questions while I'm speaking, if you could have a look at those, and I don't want to wait until the end of my presentation to start answering questions, but regularly, and I will tell you at one point, Maria, if you could share some of the questions that came up, and we could have a Q&A kind of in the middle of my session. And of course, if there is a burning question, you can always interrupt me.
Okay.
Would that work? And then we have some Q&A at the end. We'll see how this goes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Should I share my screen?
Yeah. Can you?
Okay. Let's see how that. Always a moment of up. We hope the technology is going to work fine.
Yeah, we see a screen.
Can you see my screen? So I'm going to put this in a this mode. Can you see this?
Yeah, the first slide, coaching across cultures.
Well, and it even moves to the next one, so that's great. Can you hear me well?
Very good, very well.
All right. So let's get into it. Well, first of all, I'm very pleased to be with you all, and I find it quite exciting that you are organizing this conference, Dimitri and you, Maria, this conference on cross-cultural coaching. So this is going to be our topic for today, Coaching Across Cultures. The title I propose, Leveraging Cultural Differences for Creativity, Unity, and Purpose. And the first point I want to make is, if you look at organizations today, if you look at the world, oftentimes you'll see that there is a lot of division, a lot of conflicts, a lot of misunderstanding. And that's unfortunate, both from a human standpoint, but it could also be unfortunate from other standpoints, financial losses, missed opportunities. So the good news is that it doesn't have to be that way. It could be different. If we are able to tap into the richness of cultural differences, then we can promote more unity in place of division. But it's not enough to say that cultural differences are a source of richness. We need to provide a means to ensure that we are able to tap into that richness. And that's what Coaching Across Cultures is about. So in this presentation, what I'd like to do is say a few words about why, and I should say what for Coaching Across Cultures. What's really the point of intercultural coaching? I'd like to say a few words about culture. We all know what culture is, but sometimes we have a static notion of culture that reinforces stereotypes. And you know, we would think the French are like that, the Americans are like that. And although that's a part of culture, we will see that culture is much more than that. Also, we want to share vocabulary to navigate the cultural terrain. Oftentimes, we miss the words, the language to describe culture, cultural similarities as well as differences. And I want to introduce the cultural orientation framework as a way to address this issue. And most of all, I'd like to talk about the applications of cross-cultural coaching. The applications are really at different levels. The individual level, when you coach somebody one-to-one, the team level, intercultural team coaching, organizational development, and all the way to societal development. Right, the first point is, you know, traditional coaching. I have great respect for traditional coaching. And it's also interesting to know that it has its limits. I've been a member for the ICF for many years, and I have great respect for the ICF. One of the 11 competencies, core competencies, is direct communication. So I have a friend in the US who says, direct is not enough. You need to be blunt in your communication. Well, I also happen to be a professor now in a business school in Japan. I can tell you, if you're only using direct communication, you're going to get in trouble, because you might offend somebody and the coaching relationship is going to stop right there. So we, here with this simple example, we already see the limitation of thinking that good coaching will necessarily involve direct communication. There is something else called indirect communication that also has some merits. We have been influenced by coaching made in USA, and it's great. You know, the USA have played a key role in launching coaching as we know it today. But this view of culture of coaching is not universally applicable. We need to be mindful of, you know, situations like the one I described, direct versus indirect, where, you know, some of the values that may be valid in one culture don't necessarily apply elsewhere. So what is needed really, if we want to work in an intercultural global environment, is to integrate a cultural perspective systematically into coaching. And that's what I've tried to do in the past 20 years, I should say, with the philosophy of, if we include culture into the equation, how can we also make sure that we not just try to adapt to different cultures, but that we really look at the richness that each culture can offer, so we can enrich the coaching process by doing so. I had a first presentation on this topic. Time flies, I have to say. That was in '99 in London. And my book devoted on this topic came out in 2003. So now if we look at the objectives of coaching across cultures, it really has two objectives. One, I would say, is the one you would expect. You know, coaching across cultures is about enabling more effective work across cultures. But as we will see, it's not only in an international sense. It's across all kinds of cultural differences. It could be different organizations, different generations, different professions, as we will see. So yes, helping us to do that. But there is a more fundamental goal. And for me, intercultural coaching, I would say, is a more creative and a more complete form of coaching. And by that, I mean that this form of coaching challenges us and challenges us with our cultural assumptions. We may think that the appropriate way of communicating is direct communication, to go back to that same example. And now we realize that there is something else. It doesn't have to only be that way. I will give many examples, you know, in the course of these presentations, but the idea is to be aware of the different ways of thinking, communicating, managing time, organizing ourselves, be aware of our assumptions. And if those don't work for us, we have an opportunity to go beyond those limitations, cultural limitations, learn something from other cultures. So I want to make one point clear. There is a big misunderstanding, and I haven't found a solution to go around it. When we use the word intercultural coaching or cross-cultural coaching, I find that most of the time people think a niche market. Yes, that would be useful for people, you know, who work internationally, for example. But as I will hope will be clear after this presentation, it's much more than that. You know, this concerns every coach, really, for the reasons I've started to explain and I will articulate as we go on. So coaching, a definition, you know, I assume many of you are already coaches, so you're familiar with this. But let me just share one definition, my definition: the art of facilitating the unleashing of people's potential to reach meaningful, important objectives. So as coaches, we help to unleash people's potential, and we'll help people apply their potential, use their potential to achieve objectives that would be important and meaningful to them. Well, now, coaching across cultures just helps to unleash more potential, because now we also tap into the richness that resides in cultural diversity. That's why I would argue it's just a more creative and powerful form of coaching. All right? So, culture now. What is culture? I'm sure you all have your idea of what culture is. Here's the definition I would like to propose. It's a set of characteristics that distinguishes the member from one group from the member of another group. So, in other words, it's a group phenomenon. And if you look at this definition, what it implies is that we have multiple cultures. You can be Russian, but you can also be from a certain generation, a certain city, a certain religion, and so on and so forth. I also have multiple cultures, and my behavior is going to vary depending on the group I'm associated with at one moment in time. So for example, if I'm with friends, close friends, we will tease each other. That behavior would be appropriate in that context. But now, if I move into a different context, let's say a very serious business meeting, I couldn't behave in that same way. That would not be appropriate. I could be in front of you and say, you know, I'm unprepared to speak in front of a distinguished group like you. And you could say, who is this guy? You know, he's lacking self-confidence. Well, maybe, but it could also be that I thought I was speaking to some of my Japanese friends there, where that display of humility would have been appropriate. But here in our context, maybe it's not. All right. So what characteristics are we really talking about? Oftentimes people just focus on the visible characteristics, the visible products of a culture, the visible behaviors. And they will say that if you go to China, for example, you know, you need to give your business card with two hands. You're not supposed to toss it like you would do in other places in the world. And so they would describe some visible tips that you need to have in mind. And that's great, but that's not enough if we want to understand different cultures. We need to understand that there is an immersed part, what we don't see, but is nevertheless connected and driving the external manifestations. So norms, values, and basic assumptions. That's what we are talking about here. By norm, we mean what is appropriate and inappropriate. Is it appropriate to have a conference over the internet? Some might say yes, some might say no. To be honest, it's not my preference. I prefer to be face-to-face with people, but I recognize that, hey, you know, doing this allows us here to be together today. It might not be possible otherwise. So I think it's a great, at the end of the day, it's a great norm. It may be different from my preferred norm. It's also an interesting norm to consider. Values have to do with what is important for a particular group of people. And in companies, you would have, for example, market share, profit as examples. But the example I like to give is laziness. Because, you know, I wrote my book in English and it was published in the US, and they didn't like this idea of laziness. So I agreed to change that word by the sentence, doing as little work as possible. Because that was a shocking value over there. But I would argue for somebody who's working very hard, who is on the verge of burnout, you know, laziness could be an interesting value to consider at that particular moment. So here, as an intercultural coach, I'm not here to judge the values. I'm only here to understand where people are coming from with an attitude of openness. I want to understand also the potential merit of a value, even if it's not my value. And I may learn something from it. So if I'm constantly working very hard, pushing myself, I may learn from laziness to just slow down, take the time. All right? So if we go even deeper, we go into what is called basic assumptions. We have here these assumptions or hypotheses that we are making without even being aware of it. Let me give an example. For example, how do we deal with time? I'm sorry to say that we are all going to die at some point. So our time on Earth is limited. How do we deal with this reality? Probably we are not even aware of it, but some groups tend to view time as a scarce resource. There is never enough time to do all the things we need to do. Consequently, we need to be very productive, very efficient. All right, so that's one view. And as a coach, if I'm in that view, I will help my clients be even more productive, even more effective than they are already. And that may be great, but at some point they may have the impression that they're always running after time, and that has its limitations. So another perspective would be to see that time can also be viewed as plentiful. If I believe that time is plentiful, I can just slow down, take the time, relax. And who is right, who is wrong, I don't know, but plentiful time is an invitation for us to reconsider our priorities, to step back, and that can be something very useful, including for appreciating the scarcity of time. And here is the paradox. You know, coaching across cultures is really about paradoxes. By slowing down, by viewing time in a plentiful fashion, that's how we can best appreciate the scarcity of time, in other words. You could say, well, that's nice in theory, but what is the application in coaching? Well, there are multiple applications. These days, I'm asked to coach teams, and whereas 20 years ago, you know, even executive team would have no problem spending 5 days on an executive coaching team retreat. These days, if they can devote 2 days, 3 days, it's already a lot. I'm asked to do this in half a day. And recently I was asked to coach a team over coffee break. I said, you know, that's too much. That I'm afraid I cannot do. And I cannot even do the half a day, to be honest. So what I would say to people who ask me that, so the coaching begins even before the contract, if you'd like. I would say, what do you want to get out of this coaching? It could be that what you want to get out of this coaching is not all that important. And in this case, even half a day is too much. But if what you want to get from this coaching, team coaching, is so important that is really important, then you might want to take more time. And I will certainly need more time. And so we already negotiate time, so we don't find ourselves pressed for time, and we can take the time to also build relationship, enjoy the relationship, enjoy stepping back, and regain perspectives. So that's an example. What I want to also say is it doesn't have to be one or the other. The art really is in having the cake and in eating it as well. So if we could view time both in a scarce and plentiful fashion, then we have the best of both worlds. So how does that work? So it means being effective. You do what has the greatest impact. You do the right things. And being efficient at the same time, doing things efficiently with productivity. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You want to have both as much as possible. So what I'm really promoting here is a view of culture that is more dynamic and inclusive. It's not one or the other, as we are often used to, but we are trying to promote and versus or. Okay? So let me look at culture in another way. Because if you think about it, culture has to do with nurture. It's everything we have learned along the way. We have learned what we know, typically by interacting with others, in our families, in our societies, in our companies, in our schools. What we have learned, we can also unlearn. So it's, we are not stuck with a certain cultural view. If that view is no longer working for us, we can change that view. We don't need to give up our culture, but we can enrich it. And I contrast this with nature, what we are born with. And as coaches, I invite us, and that's what I try to do, to look at both nature and nurture, our personality, what we are born with, and what we have learned along the way. That's the contribution of intercultural coaching. But to be able to do that, we need a vocabulary to navigate the cultural terrain. And there is so much to describe in culture. So one issue is, where do we start? You know, what do we do? The good news is there is this concept called cultural orientation, an inclination to think, feel, act in a way that is determined or at least influenced by culture. I gave some examples already: scarce time versus plentiful time, direct versus indirect communication. So we are not going to describe all characteristics of cultures, but just these salient traits. And the model I've devised is this one. I've built upon the work of many interculturalists, and I've grouped a number of cultural dimensions in these 7 categories that I think you will agree with me is very relevant for managers, for leaders, for coaches working in organizations. So we need to be mindful of variations around how we think, how we manage time, how we communicate, how we organize ourselves, how we define identity and purpose. I'm not going to go over all the list here. I gave some examples already, and I'm going to give more examples later on. But I just want to mention this tool as a language for describing cultural differences. The tool also comes with a cultural assessment, and that gives the possibility to create even more dimensions. So I have to say with these 17, we cover a wide range that is going to be sufficient in many situations. But if that is not enough, we have the possibility with this tool to create more cultural damage. So we are not just limited by these 17. And I want to invite you to try out, by the way, it's free of charge, it's a brand new, it just came out, COF assessment. I've had this tool for a long time, and I've wanted for a long time to create a new version, more modern version of the tool. And it's finally out, just in English, but the other languages are going to follow quickly. So if you go to cofassessment.com and then you take the complimentary COF assessment, you can generate your own profile. And that can be quite helpful to start raising your own self-awareness before you coach others across cultures. It's important to be aware of your own cultural preferences and how they are going to be manifested in your coaching. What may be your biases that might be effective on some occasions, but sometimes might be less effective. So with this, I just want to tell you what I'd like to discuss next. I'd like next to talk about the different levels of applications for intercultural coaching. But before I do that, I want to turn to you, Maria. I've spoken for 20 minutes to see if there are some questions at this stage.
First of all, Philippe, here are a lot of thanks for your metaphors and your examples. Oksana wrote, for example, thanks for you. And also, I want to ask you about the instruments.
Yes.
Maybe you can say about the best instruments in your background that can understand, is it the nature of the person or nature of the person?
I'm not sure I understood what you meant, Maria.
You said about difference. You said about the nature of the person, his
yes.
individuality, and about nature, about how he was
yes.
growing up, about the culture.
Yes.
Maybe
yes.
you can make an example.
Yes, I can give an example. You may be familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, based on the world of Carl Jung. He would argue that we are born with certain preferences. Some of us are more extroverted, others more introverted, some more feelers, others more thinkers. So there are some characteristics we are born with. And you see this with small children, even the same family, they are different. They are not, everyone is different. They may have been raised in similar circumstances. We have certain characteristics we are born with. And so that's more difficult to change. Of course, if you look at MBTI, even if I'm an extroverted, I can learn to also tap into a more introverted type of energy. And if I'm more on the feeling side, I can learn to embrace the thinking side as well. That's part of our path of development. Jung calls this the individuation path. We can become more complete by embracing the shadow part. So that's all. That has to do with our nature, if I could say, if I refer to the work of Jung. Everything else, almost, I would say, is culture. So the way we think, the way we communicate, it's not that we were born as direct communicators. We have learned to be direct because we have seen people around us communicate in a direct fashion. If we were born in a different context, probably we would have learned to be more indirect, meaning you don't say what you mean always because you don't want to offend the other person. You want to make sure that the other person is not losing face. You want to maintain harmony. That's your priority. And in some cultures, that's how people have been raised. So for me as a coach, I'm interested in helping people tap into their potential. And that potential, some of that potential is we have been born with, and some of the potential, yes, we also have been born with, but we have been influenced by our cultures. And sometimes it takes, a stepping back, understanding our norms and values, that we are not our cultures, but we have learned some cultural habits. We have learned these habits and we can unlearn them as well. Does that make sense, Maria?
That was a great answer. Thanks a lot. And we also have a question from Zanara. She asked, Dear Philippe, what is the most fascinating thing you have learned along the way studying cross-culture coaching?
Wow, that I would need more than an hour to say that. That's a very good question. For me, the most fascinating thing is when you are open to an encounter, when you reach out to people in an open fashion, when you reach out to people with openness, with eagerness to learn from them, something magical happens. There is a connection that can be established, even with people that you thought were very different from you in the first place. So that discovery, that experience of unity is perhaps what I find most fascinating. When I see a group of people very diverse, and I see this group of people coming together, and I include myself in that, and being able to tap into the richness of diversity, that is most fascinating. And in fact, the difficulty with explaining this is that it can never be a substitute for the actual experience of living the diversity. It's only when you have lived that experience that you can really get it. I cannot hear you. Maria, your micro.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Thanks a lot for your answer. And we have one question more.
Yes.
If you can answer right now.
Yes.
Culture is, an opinion, a great idea. With what culture is coaching the least compatible?
The least what?
Compatible.
Compatible with, you mean?
Compatible, yeah. I'm so
compatible.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, it depends again. What type of coaching are we talking about? Because if you are coaching from just, let's say, a US perspective, because that's where modern coaching started from, then you could say that a culture that would be very indirect, very hierarchical, for example, would not be compatible with that. But the beauty of coaching across cultures is that we integrate those different perspectives into this more complete form of coaching. And then, well, it is fully compatible with that then, and I will try to explain how with the examples I'm going to give in a moment. There has to be, I have to say, at least an openness in that culture to learn from others. That has to be there. But that's true for any coaching. You can be the best coach. You still need the coachee to be open to grow and to embark on the journey. But that's true in any culture. All right. So Maria, I propose to move on. So I have a bit of time to go over some of the applications here. All right, and then we can have some more Q&A. One, okay, the first thing, as I said, is we want to work on ourselves. So that's intrapersonal coaching before we coach others. And one-to-one coaching is, of course, a key application. Team coaching is obviously important as well. Organizational development. There is research showing that merger acquisitions, alliances often fail, and the number one reason is cultural misunderstanding, misalignment. And so we have a role that we can play here as well. And when we do all this, I think we are doing something useful for the world, in all modesty, if we can bring a contribution to promote a little bit more unity and diversity in the world today, a little bit more mutual understanding. At the individual level, here is a part of the cultural orientation framework report. I'm going to just show this to give you a sense of how this works. So that's the first dimension: control, harmony, humility. On the left-hand side is your preference, and on the right-hand side, the self-perceived abilities to engage in either control, harmony, or humility. What does it mean? Control means I believe that I'm very much in charge of my destiny. Unlimited power is the title of Anthony Robbins' book. We can achieve anything. So that's an interesting belief, because we may end up achieving indeed success against all odds. We believe so much that we have the power that we become very proactive, and in the end, we may achieve success even against all odds. So that's the case of this person, probably. He or she, you see here on the left, I do this on the left. I realized I was doing this that you may not see me. But on the left, clear control, the person probably has a belief that he or she is very much in charge of his destiny. That's good news. Also, in terms of the ability, the person believes, hey, I'm able to be quite proactive. I'm able to make things done. That's great. But what you see here also is the humility side is not a preference and not a competence either. What would that mean? Humility means I believe the power is outside of me. Inshallah, if God will. So if I take this literally, I can stop coaching, I can stop working because it's not in my hands. You could say, well, what's the use in coaching? Well, the use in coaching, there is wisdom in that. The wisdom is it reminds us of our limitations, that at the end of the day, we may not have all the power. Luck, fate, however you want to name it, will have some influence as well. And if we don't see that, the danger would be that we tend to go over our own limitations, and that can generate burnout, that can generate cheating as well, because we want to succeed so much. So there is wisdom in humility, in that it allows us perhaps to be less proud of our success, because we were not solely responsible for our success. Probably others helped us, circumstances helped us. But when we fail, we won't be as miserable. We will be more acceptant of our own failures, recognizing that we have done our best, but probably not everything was in our hands. So what I'm proposing here, and if I was coaching this person, I would ask that person, how does that play out for you? And probably this would be connected with a difficulty that this person may have to let go, to just let go, accept limitations. And that precisely might be the path for development for that particular person. All right, so that would be one example. There are 17 dimensions, but that's just one example of how this might be used in one-on-one coaching. But let's talk team coaching now. Coaching a team, for those of you who coach teams, you know that it's not easy. Even when the team is rather homogeneous, even when the team is not geographically dispersed, even there it's already a challenge. And these days, on top of that, we have the complexity coming from both diversity and distance, physical distance. How do we deal with that? Well, first, let's recognize that increased diversity might decrease performance, unfortunately, because there is more chance of conflict, of miscommunication, misunderstanding, all right? And also, there is this phenomena that was studied at Stanford University, the confirmation bias. Let me quickly explain this. We tend to be, when we see something that is different from what we believe, we still believe what we believe and tend to discount what we don't believe. Let me give this example. At Stanford, there was a study about what is the death penalty. Students were presented with a study about two purported studies about the death penalty. One for making the case for the death penalty and one against the death penalty. And these students, those who were for the death penalty, you could argue that now they have seen both sides of the argument, that maybe they have a more balanced view, but the opposite happened. Those who were for the death penalty became even more confirmed in their view of the death penalty. They tend to pay more attention to that paper about the death penalty and dismiss the other one. And the other group did the same thing as well. So they paid more attention to the paper that was in line with what they already believed in. So even when we have diversity, doesn't mean that people are going to come together. Unfortunately, oftentimes they become even more polarized if we don't deal with this phenomenon. But there is another phenomena that exists as well. A pressure to conform that is making teams less effective than they could be. The Abilene paradox is this story of people wanting to go to Abilene, this place called Abilene. One person proposed to go on a trip to Abilene. They, in fact, don't really want to go there, but nobody voices a different opinion. And they all, in the end, find themselves in Abilene on a long, arduous journey to Abilene, realizing they didn't want to be there in the first place, but nobody shared their opinion because they assumed that the others really wanted to be there and they didn't want to say something against that. Another phenomena related to that is groupthink. You know, in a group, there is this pressure to think in the same way. But if everybody is thinking in the same way, as Walter Lippmann argued, then nobody is thinking, because it's not because everybody is thinking the same way that this is the right way to think about issues. Sometimes terrible decisions have been made because there was nobody there to challenge the decision. So what we need to do in intercultural coaching is deal both with the pressure to conform and the pressure to polarize. And the research done at Harvard University confirms that indeed teams oftentimes do worse than individuals, unfortunately. But the antidote to that is dissent. We are not talking about violent dissent, but just constructive dissent, respectful dissent, and diversity. If we are able to tap into that, then teams can achieve synergy, 1 + 1 = 3. Then they can achieve creativity and innovation. And it's not just the visible diversity that we have. Some people, we have to have men and women, people from the minorities. That's important, but here we're also talking about ideas and perspectives. All right. So again, coaching across culture is really about doing that, promoting creativity and innovation by tapping into the diversity. But now let me share a few examples of using the cultural orientation framework with a group. Let me use this example. So here was a team I coached, and that was in Europe, the international executive committee of an international team. And this team was a very effective team, very high-performing team. But we had a retreat together, and they recognized when they saw these results. Remember, control is on top of that. On top here of the chart, you see the histogram with the collective answers of the group. So you see most of them on the control side, believing they can achieve anything. They have the power within. On the bottom, you see here the histogram with their abilities. And you see great control, good and excellent results on control, but less favorable on humility. You see a little bit more yellow and orange there. So what this means, and the team, when they saw this after an explanation, they realized, hey, you know what? We tend to be very proactive, very dynamic, but we are not paying enough attention to our limitations. And there was another chart I'm not going to show right here, but that showed that they were more on polychronic time versus monochronic time, doing many things at the same time. They recognized they were doing too many things at the same time. And so far, so good, they were able to sustain that, but they realized that there was no way for them to be able to continue to do that. They had to slow down a little bit. They couldn't just work 120% of the time. So what they decided during the team retreat, but after having seen this, they decided to pay more attention to their limitations. Yes, they could do 7 projects, let's say, but they are still going to only do 3 or 4 to limit themselves so they could take better care of themselves and sustain their level of performance. And indeed, that allowed them to sustain their high level of performance in the long run. Let me give another example, hierarchy equality. So that's another team, one I coached, in fact, recently, just last month. In this team, a very egalitarian culture, which is very much in line with coaching. In coaching, we have this idea that we are essentially equals. As a coach, I'm not your superior. I believe the other person has potential, has experience, has wisdom, and my role as a coach is to just help the person access that. So we are essentially equals. In that team, there was also a sense of equality. And that was great because people felt very much empowered. Everyone felt they had the power to do what they needed to do, and they didn't have to ask permission. They had a lot of autonomy, so they enjoyed that. But one issue they said during the interviews was sometimes we are slow in making decisions. We talk and talk and talk, and we don't come up with a decision. And the team leader himself was reluctant to impose things. He was kind of a laissez-faire type of leader, very nice guy. But once I had a discussion with the team leader, telling him about, the potential pitfall here. And then when we showed this to the team, they recognized that, well, this is working for us, but on occasion, it's not working so well for us. We need to be ready to accept the lead from some of our peers and from our leader. We need to accept that at times he will just tell us what we need to do, and we just need to follow that. Otherwise, we are in endless debate. So there was an incident during the team coaching where an idea was proposed, and then somebody had a different view. And what I did as a facilitator was to let both parties, present their arguments. But then was the moment of truth. I turned to the team leader and asked him, what will it be? Because evidently those two views were not going to be reconciled. And so sorry with the phone here. That's always I thought I had disconnected, but apparently people still find a way to call me. Sorry for the distraction. So what happened then? I turned to the team leader and he said, what will it be? He made the decision right there. And to his credit, people were then following his decision because they had been prepared for it. So that's what happened. And the cultural change happened right there. So let me give another example. Universalism versus particularism. We all want to be fair. I haven't seen organizations that value unfairness. But being fair may mean different things. In a particularistic culture, being fair means you want to be flexible. You want to treat every case for its own merit. In a universalist culture, it's different. It's the same rule will apply in every situation. All right? Being fair is that we apply the same rule. There is no exception. In this particular culture, that was the same team, very particular. It's very flexible. Also, you see the chart in terms of their abilities, very much on the particularistic side, good at being flexible. More difficulties, however, in just agreeing on some common rules and accepting those rules. So that, again, had worked for them, but on the other hand, they were a bit frustrated because sometimes they didn't know who was responsible for what. Some people complained that, hey, some people do more work than others, and it's like the same rule don't apply in the same way for everyone. So in a way, by watching this, by seeing this, they realize that they need to embrace a little bit more universalism. And they realize that it would be hard for them. It would mean going outside their comfort zone, but that's what they would need to do. Agree on some rules, no exception, and just follow these rules. By seeing this, by seeing the pitfall, they decided together to go outside their comfort zone and tap into universalism. All right, so you see, hopefully that gives you a sense of how this can work into practice. To basically, what we are doing is promoting, increasing the worldview, our worldview, so we have more choices available. Direct versus indirect communication, and that's the last one I'm going to show you. In this team, there was a lot of diversity around direct and indirect communication. And that created some tension. Some people you see on the left side, direct communicators, were very blunt, and others sometimes more with preference for indirect communication were easily offended by that, upset by that. And those who prefer direct communication didn't appreciate the fact that some other people were not able to just say what was on their mind. They were more indirect about it. And so the message wasn't clear. What they were able to do during the team coaching was to recognize there is, pros and cons and richness in both perspectives, but they all made an effort to learn from the other perspective. So eventually they were able to be both direct and indirect, meaning clear in the content of their communication, but sensitive, more sensitive in the way they would convey their message. And so that's how they were able to leverage the cultural differences. All right. So what I want to say before I turn to you, Maria, is one point I want to make is at one level, all teams are intercultural. There is the external, internal cultural diversity we spoke about earlier, the external characteristic, men versus women. Of course, there are biological characteristics too, but there are cultural characteristics as well. People from different countries, different generations. Internal characteristics, the different norms, values, assumptions that we are making. But there is another form of diversity. Explicit implicit. That's a little bit more subtle. Explicit is what is already manifested. And you see the example I gave earlier, direct, indirect communication. That diversity was present in the team. But if you remember the example of hierarchy versus equality, and the second example I gave about universalism, particularism, there was almost only equality in the team and almost only particularism in the team. However, the other preference was available nevertheless to the team, even though it was not manifested, even though it was not explicit, even though it was hidden, it still was there in the team. So I would argue that we all have this diversity in us. The cultural diversity is there in us. It's just a matter of unfolding it or making it in the open. And so there is always diversity to tap into, even if it's not manifested, even if it's not explicit. So therefore, all team coaching, I would argue, should be intercultural team coaching, so we can tap into more of the richness. What I don't have the time to discuss, but I want to say, of course, is there are many more activities. I just talked about the cultural orientation framework, but in seminars, in team coaching, I use a variety of activities, including some collages, and that's something you can try out, having people do some collages, and then ask them, what does this say about your culture, or about your cultural preferences? And when you have several people do that, you can compare the collages and see what are the common themes in the team. So that can be a powerful activity. We can do, what I think is important is to have feedback exchanges, different experiential activities. So, people learn best when they have a chance to experiment, as you all know. So a number of activities that we can imagine. And I'm going to stop there for a moment, see if we have the time to talk about the application at the organizational developmental level. But I want to make sure we also have time for Q&A. So let me turn to you, Maria, if there is any question at this stage.
Of course, Philippe, after such a deep presentation, there are a lot of questions. And the first question is from Lina. Lina asked, Dear Philippe, from your practice, how long does it take to unlearn cultural habits? Is it possible to unlearn it totally? Thank you for your answer in advance.
All right. As you can guess, I don't have a specific timeline to give. Yes, it is possible to unlearn, absolutely. And it may take a short time, actually, or it probably usually takes a little bit more time. Typically, as is true for all learning, we first learn to in a conscious fashion. So it is a bit more difficult because we have to make an effort to learn initially. It's this model about conscious. We don't know that we don't know. Then, so that's the unconscious incompetence. Then we know that we don't know. That's the conscious, the conscious incompetence. Then we move to conscious competence, that we know, but it takes a lot of effort. It's like when you first learn to drive a car, and change gears, it takes a lot of effort. But after a while, it becomes unconscious competence. We don't even need to think about it. But the good news is oftentimes we don't need necessarily to unlearn what we know, because what we know, our cultures already have great benefits and great merits. It's a matter of enriching that with more perspective. So if I communicate directly, I don't need to unlearn the direct communication. I just need to add, to enrich it with indirect communication so I can have a more versatile approach. I don't need to replace direct with indirect. So in that sense, maybe it's easier.
Thank you so much. And the question from Karina. Karina asked, what would you recommend? How can we develop the global mindset and cultural intelligence to be more efficient working across the culture?
What can we do? I think it starts with an attitude of openness and curiosity, the willingness to learn from the different encounters that we have, the different people that we meet. If we start with that, I think that's probably the best place to start. And then, I guess what I've tried to do in my book is give more content and more, I guess, a vocabulary, but also examples to help us in that reflection. And that's also what I'm doing. There is a 3-day seminar. I'm not here to promote it, but I just want to mention it since you asked the question. And the purpose in these 3 days, which are also a certification for the COF assessment, is to go on a journey of self-reflection. So we don't need to be alone in trying to learn this. We can be with peers and learn about ourselves and expand our coaching capability by weaving systematically culture. So seminars, reading, but most of all, this attitude of openness and curiosity.
To be honest, we have a question about your program, and the question is, do you have a program online or course to study coaching across the culture? CCE, ICF program, for example?
Well, not online. I'm sorry, not online. What I'm doing sometimes online is, I guess, on a one-to-one basis. I would do one-to-one supervision with somebody, would have a certain project, so that I do, and that takes place online. But the program, and maybe that's something I will need to develop for sure, because that's the future. But for me, I still haven't found a substitute for the actual experience of being together for a few days. So there is also a cultural difference around that. So it's a more high context, more implicit, that allows for more implicit form of communication. So we are not just using our words, but we can feel each other. We can see our reactions. We can have informal time and build those relationships more easily. So as much as I believe, in doing these things online, and probably will do so at some point in the future, I do that one-to-one, but the seminar is a residential seminar, 3-day. Immersing oneself in a place like this, I still find this to be most beneficial for this type of learning.
Thanks a lot. And one question from Marina. She asked, would you suggest to make any personal assessment for team's member coming from various cultures for a common retreat before the event?
Well, that's a good question. That's what I do, really. So what I do, and that's when you are certified to use the tool, that's what you can do also. You create your own project, and so you invite then all your team members, all the team members, to complete the survey before the program. And I use this both as a diagnostic tool, so I have a sense of, hey, what's there in terms of the cultural preferences in the team. I have the aggregate view, and that will help me in the design of the program. But then I will show this during the program as well. I won't show individual results for reasons of confidentiality, but I'm going to show the group profiles. I'm not necessarily going to show because there are 17 dimensions and we can add even more. So I'm not going to necessarily show them all, but I'm going to show those that seem to be related to the challenges that people face. And so I'm going to show these, and probably I will discuss this beforehand with the team leader. So the results don't matter per se, but these graphs I just showed are there to promote a conversation about the differences, to have a conversation. Before I developed the tool, what happened was I would be in teams who would be in denial. Of course, we communicate also directly and indirectly. Of course, we can do this and that. Of course, this and that. No, when I'm showing these results, I say, those are your answers. Okay, so you say, of course you can do this, but that's what you answered. And the questions were very straightforward. So that gives me a chance to challenge the team. So yes, a long answer to your question. I would use this beforehand in the diagnostic phase and then also during the program itself. Yes.
Thanks a lot. And the last question we have here in the board from Zanara: what could be a secret ingredient coaching intercultural executive teams, except of what's been said?
A secret ingredient. I try to. I'm really here in the spirit of sharing my secret, if you'd like. So I need to think. I try to. In this case, I'm trying to share the way I'm working. sometimes, what else could I say that I haven't said that could be helpful about coaching the team? It starts again. It starts with I've said this already, but the readiness for ourselves to work on ourselves is really important as a coach. So people are going to remember more the experience they have with us as a team coach than what we say. So if they notice that there is a genuine interest for people, a genuine desire to promote unity and diversity, that's what's going to be most important. So techniques, tools are of course useful, but the most important is the genuine desire that we have to reach out to people, to learn from them, and to promote unity and diversity. I would say that probably is the most important one.
Thank you so much. And I know that Dmitry also has a question.
Yeah, dear Philippe, I would like to ask you a live question. So now, as a linguist, I'm very interested in your point of view. So what's the difference for you from your personal experience in coaching in French and in English? If there are any differences, yeah? And maybe my second question, if you could answer, what's more important for cross-culture coaches? Good knowledge of language you're coaching or culture of this client you coach?
Okay. All right. So two good questions. Let's start with the first one. It's different and it's similar as well. When I work in a different language, in a way I'm in a different reality. Sometimes the words, for example, the word leveraging doesn't even exist in French. So I had to really think about how to say this in French. So the way I'm going to interact with people, the way I'm going to come across may be slightly different when I work in French than when I work in English. So, for example, in French, there is the tu and the vous. You may address people in different ways, and that may create. So there is a question that you need to ask yourself: am I going to use tu or vous? You don't have that question in English. If you use tu too quickly, people may think, yeah, I don't know you so well. Why are you saying tu to me? We're not that close. But if I say vous, I may run the risk of I'm creating a distance when in fact I wanted to be close to people. So you see, there are the nuances that we need to keep into account. But apart from that, for the most part, my experience is not that different, to be honest. Then for your second question, what is most important? I would say if we can know different languages, that's great, because when we learn a different language, we also learn about this other culture as well. So I have to say, even though, for example, I'm watching a series right now from Denmark. I always like to see the series in the original language. I find that I pick up something about the culture, even though I don't speak Danish. I like to see in that language. This being said, the most important is the openness about different cultures. I know people who know several languages, and that doesn't necessarily mean they are really open and eager to learn about the cultural differences. So even if you only know one language or a couple of languages, but you are really open about the cultures and you want to reach out to people, I think that might be probably the most important.
Thank you. Thank you
so much, Philippe. It was a very interesting presentation, and we have just a minute to say that there are a lot of thankful words for your presentation in our chat, and for the answers and for the presentation, and people say that it was very useful, everything you said.
I thank you. Sorry, Maria, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I want to show maybe the slide, if I may, with my contact information. I just want to invite people to feel free to contact me. So I'm posting to contact via LinkedIn. There is a Facebook page as well. So if you want to stay in touch, I don't know you all. You see me, I don't see you. But feel free to reach out to me as well. I really appreciate also, Maria, your and Dimitri, your invitation, your nice facilitation. And although I didn't see the people here, I appreciate your presence and nice words as well.
Thank you so much. We will send you other questions if we will get them.
Feel free to do that.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care. I will say goodbye now, and I look forward to seeing you. I haven't been to Moscow yet, but I look forward to coming one of these days. All right. Take care.
Take
Bye
care.
bye.
Bye.